pretty cool. We have a full house for this one. So just some context. My name's Jonah. I'm an investor at a fund called Blockchain Capital. We were the first ever venture fund in the space, period. Started about 11 years ago. So a pretty cool track record. Like we're early Coinbase, early Circle, Tether, Aave, OpenSea, so all the big names. And we're nil investors as well. Really excited about them. I think in the recent months, there's been a huge debate about the state of Ethereum, Ethereum versus Solana, are L2s parasitic, where does value get captured? And a lot of people are kind of challenging the initial L2 roadmap. And there's good arguments on both sides, and I think that from a builder's perspective, understanding these arguments is very important because it will inform design decisions, it will inform where you deploy, what you deploy. So the goal of this conversation, Avi is like super tapped into these questions, and we're going to just discuss them, walk through the trade-off. We're gonna make this super conversational, so if you disagree with us, like raise your hand or just interject and start speaking. We're gonna walk through all the big questions of today. So I guess maybe Avi, you wanna introduce yourself as well?
Cool, yeah, I'm Avi. I'm the CEO at NIL Foundation. What is NIL Foundation? We've been around for a long time, since 2018. We've done a lot of really low-level work in the field of ZK. We rolled our own cryptography library. We wrote circuits. We built out some developer tooling, and now we have NIL, which is our L2. And yeah, I have lots of opinions about like the Ethereum roadmap. I would really like to hear from you guys, though. Like, what is your perspective? You know, how do you guys think about these things? So, just chime in wherever you've got a thought. And we have potentially a representative from the EF in the house who can maybe chime in too.
Amazing. So maybe just to frame the conversation, I think the first segment is going to be about Ethereum and its competition. So I think historically Ethereum saw itself as competing with Bitcoin, and the idea was that Ethereum is like Bitcoin, but it has an execution layer. And that was its differentiation. So it has all the great properties of Bitcoin. It's decentralized. It has good censorship resistance, all that. But the one core difference is you actually have smart contracts. And I think in the past year, it seems that there's actually a wholly different competition, namely Solana. And it has attracted a lot of builders, a lot of mind share, a lot of applications. It's generated a lot of revenue. And there's a new competitor in town. So maybe it's the first segment. I'm curious how you view Ethereum in light of the Solana competition. Are they competing? Maybe just walk me through how you think about this.
Yeah. Well, I think the framing of like Ethereum versus Bitcoin is interesting to revisit because if you read the Ethereum white paper, like the first 3 pages, I mean, Vitalik essentially frames the whole problem of Bitcoin expressivity, right? And like, okay, programmability was the thing that you wanted to, or he wanted to have for Ethereum. And you know, you could have done, use Bitcoin script. You could have built like a meta protocol, which is essentially a layer 2 on Bitcoin, which has a lot of complications. Or you build like an entirely new chain. And obviously, it chose to build an entirely new chain and built out the EVM and Solidity, and you had smart contract execution and programmability. And then and then 4 years ago, there was a big shift in, I think, what Ethereum was supposed to be, which was away from execution and being this programmability execution layer to, okay, we're going to service roll-ups because they're far better, far superior at scaling the execution and offering that programmability. And that, I think, was like a very clear direction 4 years ago, and now we're at this point where Ethereum's in this really weird middle ground because L2s have all these problems with interop, it hasn't quite shaped out to what you want it to be, and then you have something like Solana come around that's just in some ways far superior as this programmability execution layer. So yeah, I mean, and then that leaves Ethereum with well, okay. What are we right now? And I think, we were talking about this just before, there's a long, I think there's still kind of a clear long-term vision for Ethereum as, this base layer for settlement, for trust, potentially as DA, but like the short to medium term roadmap feels very divergent. There's like a lot of different paths that it can take, and I think that's an existential threat. When you have, like alternatives for Solana, or alternatives like Celestia, and you have rollups moving from ETHDA to like AltDA. Like these things are objectively bad for Ethereum, I think, and so I think it's in a really like precarious spot. I don't know if I feel like that's consensus view. I don't know if anybody has different views there. Do you?
Yeah.
Why do you see AltDA as bad for Ethereum?
I can take that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting question, and it's been pretty hotly debated. So it is, I'm going to take a step back to answer your question. Ethereum is a proof of stake chain, which means it is fundamentally the security of the chain is backed by the ETH asset. You need the asset to be valuable for a chain to have any security, right? And for the asset to be valuable, there's really two avenues. One, it's money, right, as possible. Another is a productive asset, right? So let's put the money argument aside for a second. Like, I don't see anyone doing TikTok dances about Ethereum online, so it's probably looking more like a productive asset for now. There are basically three places that fees can come from. The first being just actual execution on the L1. The second being L2 settlement, right? I mean, obviously that looks like an execution proof, but just separating it out. And the third is from DA. So if you look about what's happening with Ethereum right now, it seems that most execution is fleeing the L1 and going to the L2s. And when you look at the ratio of how much Ethereum captures from the L2s, it's pretty low. So this is a ballpark estimate, but for every dollar that's paid to Base for block space, about only 1 penny gets given to Ethereum. So it doesn't seem like L2 settlement, when it comes to like the execution side, is a huge revenue driver for a token, which means that's not a really good fee story for the token, which means that it doesn't create much value for a token. So there's another big revenue source that's potentially DA. And Ethereum probably offers, I think Justin Drake calls it the most pristine DA. And it's true, it has the best trust assumptions, it is the most secure. And the hope is that Ethereum, by offering this new asset, namely the DA asset, it could generate a lot of revenue that way, which puts demand on the Ethereum token, and that'll be net good for Ethereum token, which is net good for Ethereum security, which means that having DA and being a DA winner with the current L2 roadmap seems necessary for ETH to maintain its value or increase in value. And what seems to be the case is that Celestia, EigenDA, these alternative DA sources do 80% of the job, are a fraction of the cost, and seem good enough for most protocols. And that is frightening for Ethereum, right? So if Ethereum does not win the DA wars, and people are choosing these kind of other areas like a Celestia to do it, that's just a lot less revenue to Ethereum. And if Ethereum does not win DA, and it seems like it's getting a lot less money from L2 settling, and it seems like execution is fleeing the L1, it puts the asset in a precarious position, and thus the base chain in a precarious. When I say base chain, I mean like mainnet in a precarious situation.
Yeah, that's a very good explanation. Yeah. I'm curious. Do you know off the top of your head, if you just kind of take the aggregate amount of data that's posted on DA layers for L2s, like what is the market share split of like Ethereum to Celestia today? Or if you had to guess, like what?
I don't want to like miss a quote.
Okay. But like that, I mean, that's an important thing to watch, right?
Yeah. I think separately, which I believe, I mean, I know I was on a panel with Justin, he disagreed with this, but I think that someone, I guess Dankrad would agree. I don't think DA is a good business model. I think it's a completely flawed business model. Like typically, short-term storage is a loss leader for some other product. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the history of storage over time, you pay less and less for it, not more. People, and by the way, DA, like I think people forget what it is. It's basically just really short-term storage of like transactions, just so you can make sure like a full node has like stored them. It is not a particularly sophisticated product, and the willingness to spend on it should not be too high. So I think even to take a step back, I think the idea that Ethereum's positioning itself where DA needs to be the place it captures revenue is a dumb idea. I think if you look at the history of like these storage solutions, that's not where you make money. So I actually think it's fundamentally flawed, which I think will be a different part of the conversation about whether the Ethereum roadmap is the right roadmap for it to be the most valuable chain. But maybe just to stop, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you guys have interacted with DA solutions. Like, do you guys have different thoughts or disagree? Does anybody think DA is like a good business model? Well, I guess there's some consensus there.
Yeah, I mean, there is like this argument around like a DA layer having network effects for, like interoperability, right? And like everybody's plugging into the same DA layer, and you're reading from the same layer, and maybe roll-ups figure out the interop problem, and you want to, maybe you want to be on the same DA layer, but at the same time there's alternatives for interop that don't require that. So I think it's kind of I would agree. Like it feels like a precarious long-term.
Yeah, maybe put the question to you guys. I mean, you guys are going to need DA as a L2. Do you think you're going to be using Ethereum DA, or if Celestia offers it for a fraction of the cost, we'll just use Celestia?
No, we'll use Ethereum DA as long as we can. Yeah. I think that's a lot. I mean, I was just on a panel with Nick from Fuel, and he said like explicitly, plainly, we're probably moving away from ETH DA. Because it's too expensive, and we want to grow really aggressively, and we're not going to be able to do it. And like functionally, it's actually like a very easy transition to make. You're just pointing your endpoint somewhere else, right? It's not like this huge like engineering lift. So I mean, hopefully, right? Actually, we move away from ETH DA because that means we're doing well as an execution layer. And I think a lot of people have those similar incentives, right? I mean, I think the other question is, once some of these existing L2s start moving away from ETHDA, where do they go, right? Do they go to Celestia, or do they just start running like a committee in-house, right? And I think a good thought exercise is like thinking about Base, right? Base is owned by this corporate entity, with public shareholders. Base has become this incredible revenue engine for Coinbase. Their profit margins are, insane, and but there's this kind of like weird like line item that's ETHDA costs, right? Well, if you're a corporate shareholder, like, what do you tell Coinbase to do? Well, how do we bring those costs down? And you can go and offload it to something like Celestia, or if you're somebody like Base with an institutional reputation, already a lot of trust, you just do it in-house, right? And I think this is, I think that's a really scary proposition that, like, I hope that doesn't happen, because now we just have these like institutional, blockchains. We kind of like have reverted back to like the permission blockchain, philosophy or view that was really popular 4 years ago.
Do you think there are security implications if you move to an RDA or to a committee in-house that can be relevant for the market when they determine potentially where they move their capital?
Yeah, maybe just to answer that question. That's a fantastic question. So when it comes to security questions about DA, just as a reminder, DA is a protection against a liveness failure, not a safety failure. Are people familiar with the difference of a safety versus liveness error in a blockchain? Or it'd be helpful if I like walk through it.
Do it really quick, yeah.
Yeah, so safety would be like, I can double spend, or I could like send money I don't own, or something like that. Like that is fundamentally like, there's like a flaw with blockchain. I can like manipulate state in a way that I shouldn't be allowed to.
It's correctness.
The correctness of the state. A liveness failure is like, I can halt the chain. I could make it that we can't produce more blocks, right? So that means your money's stuck. It doesn't mean that someone can steal your money. Well, I guess similar concept, but sorry, do you have a question?
No, sorry, I was.
So that's a liveness failure. So obviously they're both important, right? If like Ethereum stops tomorrow, everyone's money's stuck, and that's terrible, right? But it's a different type of error than I could steal your money. So what DA is all about, like DA data availability, is making sure that when somebody posts a state transition in a block, they also give you the data to be able to continue running the chain and don't withhold the data, which will prevent you from the chain to keep going forward, right? So notice that what is DA for? It fundamentally is about protecting against a liveness failure, and it's making sure the chain can't halt, right? So right now, Base, I might be wrong, but there's no way to force a transaction, right? If Coinbase tomorrow said we'll stop producing state transitions on Base, like Base halts. I'm pretty confident. I don't think there's a way to force in a transaction. Is there?
I know some other OP stacks.
Some OP
do,
stacks.
but I don't know if
Base
I think base also.
Base allows you.
I think they have this sequencing.
Do they?
Or maybe I don't know. Need to check. They have two bits.
Yes, it's a good question. The only point is that a lot of these L2s don't have that yet, which means that like the marginal like liveness difference by using an alt DA isn't such a big deal. There's like more important, if you had like rank order protection against liveness, like being able to have a forced transaction is like 10 times more important, arguably. I could probably play the other side to that. But the truth is, when it comes to alt DA, I think the bigger trade-off is about like single slot finality and like there's some things can go wrong there. But you're right. There's some marginal trade-offs, but I don't think it's like the biggest. They're the biggest, most important thing. Or when you rank order, what is important for security? Like ETHDA versus alt-DA is like the highest of the list. There's like places you would probably start first if you want to like increase the security of your chain.
Yeah. So to that point, would ETHDA versus I guess Celestia be a trade-off between correctness and availability and something to be willing to pay for one way or another, irrespective of the cost differences? Like, are there different use cases in which correctness is worth substantially more than availability, and there's a willingness to pay?
Yeah, I mean, if you're like nation state resistance
Right.
or whatever.
I mean, that's like the one. I mean, like thinking about the application layer, like if you are building something that's like kind of in the gray zone, right? Like could be illegal, could easily be censored. You want to do something with like really strong censorship resistance, liveness guarantees, right? And you'd want to use like ETHDA, and ETHDA is definitely good at that. Like a good example of this is like Sonium, which the Sony L2, right? Like that was amazing product marketing, right, for ETHDA. But that's really interesting, like case study because, like, what do you think the conversations are inside Sony, right? Where they're like, guys, like we have this hard requirement around KYC and AML. How the fuck are these people still using the product? Like this is a problem for us actually. Like, yeah, I don't know if we were planning to talk about this, but I think a lot of the DA, conversations, they really should be in the context of the applications that you want to build. And yeah, when we think about institutions, like ETHDA is not like what institutions actually need, right? You want something like a little bit different, right?
Yeah. Is it kind of like a proxy trade on like decentralization mattering versus not mattering then, or is that unfair?
I think that's
kind of. It's. I think it's a little bit more like it's a liability question, right? Like, you're a corporation. You're gonna like offer this, money transmitter thingy that we don't really quite know how it's gonna be regulated, and you need to manage your risks.
But just play the other side of it for a sec. Like using ETHDA is objectively better. Like if cost was no object, right? Like it's better than using Celestia's DA. But when you're factoring the cost, then the question becomes like, for your application, is it worth it? Right? In a perfect world where everything was free and there was abundant ETHDA, then maybe ETHDA is better. But it doesn't mean, right, that given the cost it is. And I actually think to zoom out, this actually leads to a very interesting conversation about Ethereum versus Solana development, where I think that a lot of Ethereum teams think like want to use really cool technology and then try to figure out a use case for it. Whereas I think a lot of the Solana developments, like we have a use case, let's back up the technology we need for it. So like kind of product-led thinking versus like technology-led thinking. And I think a big question is coming up more and more is Ethereum over-engineered, right? Like Solana might be a little bit less decentralized, but seems like to do a pretty damn good job, and seems like the consumer is at least willing to put up with those trade-offs. So maybe I'm curious how you think about that. Like when looking
A little tongue in cheek. I mean, if there was an airstrike on Amsterdam, right, probably it would be pretty bad for Solana, and yeah, people would be upset. But what do I think about the differences for application
when
dollars?
you look at like applications building on Solana versus
Well,
Ethereum.
well, yeah. I mean, there are like so many just philosophical differences between Ethereum and Solana. Actually, like, okay, so there's two that I want to talk about. One is, yeah, just their approach to like product and technology development. You know, you have like, ship fast, break things. You know, very like Silicon Valley type of organization that is like the Solana Foundation and Solana Labs, and it works like really well for what they want to do, which is they want to optimize for developers who want to build product. And then Ethereum is like is sort of the opposite. Like, let's build great technology. Let's think on in terms of centuries, right? Let's fund like a lot of research, and as long as we do like good, high integrity, almost like scientific work, we're gonna be good on for the long term. And that also like because when people talk about Ethereum and Solana today, scale is obviously like a big topic point. And those two sort of cultural differences or worldviews manifest in how they've scaled their blockchains. And the irony is like I'm very convinced Solana or Ethereum chose the right philosophical view for scaling, which was we actually want to build like this world computer. You actually want like global financial systems. Not just a single global application. Like you want many of these working in parallel. You want them to be composable. And the only way that you can do this is you distribute compute over as many machines as you possibly can. And we just know this because software adoption outstrips hardware improvements. And this is horizontal scale. And everything Ethereum has done since its inception has been for horizontal scale. Sharding, and super quadratic sharding, and then the roll-up centric roadmap, plasma channels, all of these things have all been consistent with that worldview. Solana took the opposite approach that, okay, we're gonna do things quickly. We're going to optimize the a builder's probability of building a product that's useful, and we're gonna run everything in this really low latency box. But it's going to be one block, and we're just going to keep juicing hardware utilization or increasing hardware requirements, and like that in the near term, like that has worked really well, and I think it will probably work well for the next for the foreseeable future. But eventually, Solana will need to adopt this different worldview, which I think will be
a little bit with network extension.
Yeah, they are a little bit, right, and but like. I don't think it's actually too controversial that we have like an understanding of what the end state of blockchain architecture looks like. Like Mina in some ways, right? Like you guys were kind of very ahead of this time where you have a very light base layer that's doing settlement and or DA, or you have a separate DA layer, and then you have a lot of execution environments running in parallel that can be verified on whatever that base layer is. And Ethereum has been right on this, like, since 2016, right? Since they went live. So tying this back to the developer point, I'm not really sure how, but I think that's like that manifests in it's a cultural difference though. That's the important thing, right? Like people talk about the scaling differences and Solana's TPS, but these things are rooting in like worldviews.
Maybe
Right,
we can
yeah.
actually. Oh, sorry.
I also have a question. You have also companies like Movement Labs and
Yeah.
Monad trying to actually be an EVM replacement, right? Or something like it.
Yeah.
I think Monad is introducing like instead of a global mempool, they have like a local mempool, like to introduce more scaling. Do you think that has more of a future in like than Ethereum itself? Also with Movement Labs trying to bring Move to EVM to actually
Yeah, I think this is a really good segue to a different segment we wanted to talk about. So, do you mind if we answer a question later, but switch segments? Awesome. So, it is trivial, as Avi said, that like scaling via like horizontally scaling is the right approach, and the reason is one machine can't do everything. We know that as a fact. You're bounded by the laws of physics. But I think there's a big question now that's come up is, was the Ethereum method for scaling correct? And what I mean by that is that Ethereum scaled by each shard of Ethereum, so each of the L2s are a different brand, a different company. And the question then becomes, are these shards of Ethereum or parasites on Ethereum that are leveraging Ethereum's security and settlement and all those really cool properties, but contributing very little back? So giving my base example, for every dollar it makes, it pays 1 penny back. So is Ethereum really scaling horizontally, or are other people just leveraging all the work Ethereum did and kind of creating their own ecosystem? So I think that's going to be the opener for the next segment, and then we'll talk about like companies like Move and all that. So, so do you think L2s are parasites, or do you think they're actually contributing to some sort of like Ethereum is horizontally scaled? Like, does base equal Ethereum? Does nil equal Ethereum? Does Move equal Ethereum?
Right. No, I don't really think that I don't think they are Ethereum. I mean, just one quick thing on Monad really quick, because Monad is like in no way whatsoever like Ethereum, supportive or like even like, I mean, it's Ethereum because they use the EVM and they've like kind of branded it like as Ethereum, but like the line stops there, right? It is a completely other L1. I'm pretty sure they're not using ETH as like their native gas token. Like it's just like totally separate thing. Coming back to the L2 like parasite problem. There's like this natural. Sriram has this great line. It's like there's this natural condition of humans, which is if you let people go off on a whim, you can't expect them to follow you. Like if you say, we got to jump off this bridge, like people just aren't going to follow you. And this is essentially what the roll-up centric roadmap was that, listen, it's all up to you. It's not our problem. And the EF at times would even say this, that it's not our problem, right? L2s are going to scale. They're handling execution. And so people went off and they built their own stacks. And, there's a great website that is slipping my name, but
L2B?
No, not L. They list the opcodes of all of the EVM or all of the rollups. EVM codes, yeah. And everybody's running like an EVM, but they're all running their own version of the EVM. And give or take a few opcodes. Some people are enshrining account abstraction, so on and so forth. But you have this fragmentation. That makes it very difficult to build standards across them. And I think this is only becoming a more divergent market, to your point of like Movement Labs, which, they're bringing like the Move VM to Ethereum, which is great. But like, is it good for Ethereum? And I think there's a strong argument to take that it's not good for Ethereum. Because I think for Ethereum to get out of this like parasitic relationship with L2s, you do need a coordination effort where these L2s agree upon standards and they feel like Ethereum, right? And the only way that you do this is you standardize. And this is like a lot of the recent work that the EF is doing around the L2 roadmap is native rollups, base rollups, ultrasound rollups. And essentially, trying to reel in the flexibility that they gave rollups to begin with, and saying, okay, you have to do this, like use this execute opcode. It's going to minimize your governance risks, or you have to use an Ethereum validator for sequencing. What we do is we said the principal problem here is a control problem. It's a standard problem or standardization problem. We're going to just build essentially a roll-up cluster with that in mind, where we will control what are the interop standards for a cluster. Because again, we believe that this roll-up centric roadmap was the correct decision for scale. right? And eventually you're going to need to face that, and Solana will face that, and all other mega ETH will face this, right? You'll need several mega ETHs if you want to run anything at global scale. So yeah, we took a very opinionated approach on, what do we think where should standards come from, right? And we say, okay, the EF isn't really, we're not really making a lot of progress there. We're just going to insert our own, and we'll work with ecosystem efforts, but the top priority is that we have interop within the cluster. So
maybe just to jump in, I think it's maybe sometimes helpful for the question about are L2s parasitic to steelman both sides of the argument. So I'm gonna give it a stab, but actually it would be awesome if other people can jump in for this. So L2s are great for Ethereum. Would be and we can try to steelman that together. They pay fees back to Ethereum in the form of they pay for settling to Ethereum.
They take on marketing responsibility.
They take on marketing responsibility. They promote the EVM, which is they onboard people, and presumably a fraction of all the fees they make should be contributed back to Ethereum in a form of settlement cost.
Yeah, and you hope some degree of loyalty on the onboarded ecosystem, and then they just jump or scout.
And you hope that they kind of move around all the L2s. No L2 necessarily dominates, but you basically have different entry points. You hope that perhaps they pay for DA, and basically you end up with this economic relationship where the L2s benefit from the decentralization security of Ethereum, right? But they have their own distribution, and they contribute back in the form of fees and all of that, right? So I think that's and the other benefit is because Ethereum was not opinionated about this, you get a lot of experimentation, right? OP stack looks very different than ZK Sync that looks very different than NIL, it's very different than movement, right? So you end up having a lot of different experimentation, and you kind of facilitate there being a lot of different options, right? Different security trade-offs, and it's very interesting. And hopefully, as a market structure, doesn't lead to an L2 with a monopoly. As a result, Ethereum ends up being this hub in this hub and spoke model, and and it has a lot of control. So I think that would be a good steelman of it. Does anybody have any other points that?
I wanted to add something about this because, for example, for me, I build a financial product, payments product, and that does. But I always before that was an EVM. But for me, it was very important to strategically choose where I'm going to build on as well. So if I'm going to build on layer 2, I'm actually choosing a centralized company in essence, because they have a centralized sequencer normally for a lot of them. And that can also be negative in some ways if they manage their ecosystem in a bad way, or there's some security breaches going on, anything like that. In layer 1, there's less risk of that. Of course, there's the same risk, but you are less dependent on a centralized entity to run things.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Right? You benefit from not having to make that choice.
Yeah, so it can be good. But
And the fact that there's different distribution, all that, right? You end up making the choice, and you're not only taking in addition to the risk of building a company, risk that you chose the wrong ETH, right? But maybe so now I guess that's a good segue to steelmaning the other side of these things are parasitic, and the answer is and the way to think about that one would be these things contribute very, very little back to Ethereum in terms of fees, not that much.
They're risky.
Yeah, that's a good one. But another one that wouldn't necessarily mean it's parasitic, right? But they contribute very little back in fees. They're not necessarily incentivized to use DA. They're not necessarily incentivized to play ball with other L2s, right? Does Optimism want to be sending users over to Arbitrum? Probably not. They probably want to keep people in their ecosystem, so they actually want to monopolize their distribution. And a good example of this is that you have OPStack has their own interop solution for intra OPStack. ZK Sync has it for themselves, right? So they're actually incentivized to make their local zone, right, have really good intra-op, whereas going outside of them, very, very difficult. So they're actually incentivized to trap users in their ecosystem and not share them. Another important thing is that, right, because they own the top of funnel, right, their goal is to, I guess, commoditize the base layer and them capture all the value. So they're fundamental. And another thought process of doing that is they're not incentivized to promote ETH as the asset on their L2. They're incentivized to promote their local asset or USDC because it's a good UX. So they're not really necessarily incentivized to use Ethereum as an asset, right? So now what would have had these users been transacting on Ethereum mainnet, they've been using ETH, which puts buy pressure on ETH. They're actually, users on the L2 are not necessarily incentivized to do that. the counter argument is obviously that the L2 needs to hold some ETH in order to settle, but as we said, settling is very cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be the parasitic argument.
I also
Yeah.
wanted to add one more thing. I don't know if it's the same thing with all rollups, but it's also autonomy of deployment because we built a privacy pool on StarkNet, for example. And I had a very interesting discussion with Starker about this. We had the whole product, everything works, but they actually said like, okay, if you're going to deploy this contract to mainnet, we're just going to block you.
Hmm.
And
Oh, wow.
they can do that because they have a centralized sequencer. I was completely surprised by that because it should be my own risk to do that. And I'm not saying I would have taken that risk, but for Rob to tell me that they were going to block my contract, I was like, look.
Yeah.
So I think this gets not into the parasitic question, but like whether or not these are quality products,
Right.
right?
Yeah. I mean, the other point, which is tangential to the parasitic question, but on the interop, between clusters, that right there aren't like natural market forces for them to play ball, but you also like within each of these clusters, there aren't a lot of natural market forces for them to work together. I mean, just think of you now have Inc. and Base, right? Coinbase and Kraken, like two very clear competitors, working within the same stack. I think there's an argument to be made that like this cluster interop actually, like there isn't a lot of incentives there, and that just further contributes to this fragmentation that I think ultimately leads to this like parasitic nature of L2s, where again it doesn't feel like L2s are a cohesive network. Like they're just their own, their own state machine, they're their own chain that just is branded with OP or branded with some Ethereum relationship.
Maybe to ask a question to you. So that is a downstream effect of a design choice that the execution environments are their own brands, right? And we're going to let them each kind of go off and do their own thing. I think NIL, interestingly, took a very different approach where they did not brand the different shards and actually it's just out of the box. Maybe you can walk through that thinking.
Yeah. Well, again, it comes back to the same worldview that Ethereum holds, which is you want to run execution over as many machines as possible, but you want those machines to feel as one. And so we said, okay, you're not going to spin up a shard. You're not going to handle any sort of chain infrastructure. You're just going to handle smart contracts, and we're going to treat all of these shards, all of these, isolated or separate state machines as one. Right, so you all share the same sort of addressing format. The first 4 characters, they identify which shard it is. As a developer, you just have a function call that's an async call to an address and calling some sort of logic, and it doesn't matter where that address lives on the network, whether it's on your state root or some other shard state root. Yeah, I mean, obviously this is like good for scale, but it's also good for, I think, just like ecosystem development, right? Because one of the benefits that we really saw work well for Solana was all boats rise with the tide, right? And applications on Solana that did well, helped Solana, and that helped other applications. And right now, the path that some of these, I think, the roll-up stacks are taking is a very like app chain dominant view, which is promoting people to run their own infrastructure, and again without cohesion, without interop, without shared market incentives, these are not an ecosystem. They're just kind of, it's like an umbrella brand, and so yeah, we hope to be like as agnostic as possible with respect to that, and the ecosystem is what what shines. It's not so much the brand of each of these shards or rollups.
I think this like bleeds very nicely into, I guess, one of the last segments, which is about your choice as an application developer. And it seems like there's really 4 choices of where to deploy. Or maybe I'll add a 5th one at the end. There's an ETH mainnet, but it doesn't seem like that's being promoted. It seems like they want you to go to a L2, right? There is going to an alt L1 like Solana. There is the option to deploy on a generic L2, right, that like could do everything, or there's the option to make your own app chain. I guess the 5th bonus is like to have this like multi-deployment situation like what Uniswap does, where it has an app chain and it's a bunch of different chains, and you basically navigate a bunch of different deployments. But I think that a big question is you get to decide, are you going to go into the Solana world? That's the question. But once you're in the Ethereum world, can you maybe walk me through the trade-offs as an application developer of choosing to deploy on a kind of a all-purpose L2 or run your own app chain? Like maybe you can walk me through the pluses and minuses of each. And by the way, I imagine a lot of people here went through the same choice. So if you want to interject, obviously, please do.
Yeah, well, let's steel man it again, because I think the argument that has been made for app chains is one, like you can internalize dependencies, right? So you don't rely on any, to your point around Starkware, right, or Starknet. Yeah, you get to control that. Now, you take on liability risk, but it's your decision to make. That's number one. Number two, because you control and you run the infrastructure, you have this business model, right, of collecting execution fees. Now, some people, say that execution fees are, going to go to zero, right, and that's not a very good business to be in. And then you have the MEV topic, right, where there's always MEV. If you have control execution, there's going to be some sort of extractable value, and if you're running that infrastructure, then that's a revenue source for you that can be sustainable long term. I think those are the reasons why you would want to run an app chain, right? The cons are that you lose composability with other state because we don't have we actually just don't have interop protocols and messaging layers for L2s in a way where liquidity can really flow, right? And if you just look at flow of assets from L1 to L2 and then L2s to L2s, it's really just like a lot of stablecoin flow that's probably speculative in nature. So you lose off this composability advantage. You also lose out on kind of the compounding network effects of an ecosystem, right? Where, okay, if an application on chain A is doing really well, right, it's bringing in users and liquidity that immediately or very easily could flow into application B. You also obviously can't tap into it because you don't have that composability. What would other downsides be for?
Man, it's close to the crowd. I mean, I imagine many of you guys have made this choice, so.
I think there could be like another option listed. What if you launch a stateless app chain by a CKV or a CK coprocessor? Right? Like you don't have the infra cost, you don't have the liability, but you can still get like performance scaling.
It's so funny. I would just call that like an app chain. I mean, maybe that's just like super pedantic, but I mean, a coprocessor. I mean, an L2 is like one version of a coprocessor, right? Like I think like listen, we're investors in risk zero, so please use them. It's just another design, another way of making the same.
I mean, you do have like differences than if you would like just spin up an OP stack chain.
Yeah.
Right? Because you don't have the nodes, you don't.
That's a good call.
Component of the infra.
That's an interesting point. Yeah.
But I mean, so many applications require statefulness, right? And I think, in some ways, it's like you can't just like port over Uniswap and run it like in a stateless coprocessor because, right? Like,
you do need to put some state somewhere.
Yeah.
It's not full state.
So I mean, the big trade-offs with app chains is you lose composability and you lose the network effects around like an ecosystem growing around you. And there's also actually coming back to the benefits is you have your own fee market, right? So you don't get congestion fee pricing that might outprice the functionality of your application, which a lot of people. I mean, Solana, right? You have folks that are now interested in network extensions and isolating their fee market, or applications moving off of Solana again, just using it as kind of the example of a high performance chain to building their own L1. So again, they have that isolated fee market. And if you have an app chain, you can have that isolated fee market. The counter to that is that you can actually build a single general purpose chain that can scale linearly with the machines that you're running on the network in such a way where you can really mitigate a lot of this congestion fee pricing. And again, that comes back to how we think about zk sharding, right? And we can spin up new shards that are from day one connected with the rest of the network and sort of normalize congestion fee pricing. Yeah, I don't know if there's other app chain, for app chain, against app chain.
Well, I think like we've talked about like the pros of app chain, the community, or I guess it would be a downside of why you wouldn't want to go to an app chain. Like there's obviously the liquidity problem, and like that's part of they're not just not being a community. But there's also like the tech problem where if I'm building something and I want to use some API, like well they're going to support Ethereum, they're going to support maybe Base or something, but they're definitely not going to support whatever like latest and greatest thing there is out there, even if it is EVM.
Yeah.
There's just a ton of like Uniswap isn't going to be on every single EVM, right? You have to do all that extra work, and that's like for me a big thing. I want to do as me as a freelancer. I want to do the minimum amount of work possible to deliver to the client, and like
Totally.
at the end of the day, being able to rely on those kind of third-party providers is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good
How
point.
are we looking on time, by the way? Just so I can like.
Yeah, it's 3:11. Oh, wait.
All right. We have a couple more minutes.
I don't know. Yeah. Or
Okay, awesome. So I think
Okay.
to that question, that's actually a really interesting point. I think a lot of the founders in our portfolio have like very similar conversations. I think what's interesting is that right now, when you're going into Solana, you're not making any of these. You don't even think about it, right? You're kind of day one integratable with everything, right? Like you benefit from the network effects, right? You're pretty seamless interop, relatively cheap fees. I think in the case of Ethereum, you're right? Like if you're using the newest and latest and greatest L2, you kind of are an island, right? You don't have all the connectivity everywhere. I think though, just to play kind of devil's advocate to kind of everything we've been saying so far, Introp's actually getting a lot better on Ethereum, like a lot better. And when you think about what interop means, and you like really boil it down, the only real thing you need to be able to do is bridge between different execution environments, right? Like there's not really much other actions you need to do. Like people talk about having like synchronous composability where like one application can directly call another, but truthfully, like with the exception of certain like DeFi cases, like you want to lever buy something or whatever, like you don't necessarily need that. And being able to just bridge assets across chains seems like sufficient. And I actually think UIs are getting a lot better at it. Like a lot of people always argue this is a infrastructure problem, but I think this is also a UI problem. And I don't know if people use Jumper ever or use Across. Like
Relay is great.
Yeah, like these things are getting really good. And on top of that, wallets are actually putting this in the wallet. So you're actually able to kind of bridge between places in the wallet, which is really nice. And on top of that, I think there's a growing understanding that for your application, being able to kind of interrupt, I'll get to you in a sec, into your application is an important problem. And you're actually seeing a really interesting design paradigm where, let's pretend there's a deposit button on the application. It like looks at your wallet, decides, okay, where are your assets, and like uses like the LeFi API or the Relay API or Cross to like suggest to you how to like get over into the application. And applications are actually making it more seamless. So my bet is that by the end of this year, like that will be a dominant paradigm where when you click to use an application and you don't have assets natively in an execution environment, it will find you a path. And I think we're actually getting there. So I think a lot of the security questions are, the interop questions are being solved just at the UI layer. But
You actually answered the question.
oh, awesome.
Yeah.
I guess maybe how many people here do like building applications? Awesome. Yeah, I guess, have you guys been playing around with this, or do you assume the user will like bring their own asset and come come with the asset on the right execution environment?
That's not even something I've like even considered that like that was even possible, to be honest.
Oh yeah.
Like, do any major wallets implement that? Like MetaMask definitely doesn't.
So Phantom does it, and a couple others have bridging features in the wallet, and you also have some
It's
companies.
like chain abstraction stuff, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really where you get that kind of user experience from.
But a lot of people are just doing it themselves, right? Like truthfully, it's like you're an API call away from doing it. Like there's a lot of kind of cross-chain bridges and all that stuff that have an API that you can just ping, and it can like recommend a transaction route for you. So you can actually on the button right? If the conditional, if the user has assets on the chain, great. If not, give them the transaction to get over.
Yeah, but when I'm writing apps, the browser doesn't have any context into like what, because like just for me personally, I have my MetaMask like extension. I have most of my money on a safe that I keep on a ledger, and I have like other things on my phone. Like how would like the browser context, like how there'd be any kind of API that could possibly determine like this person, here's all their wallets.
Oh, not all their wallets. I'm saying when you connect, when like you
Yeah,
connect.
but you have to already be connected. That only works if you have
Yeah, so
multiple extensions connected to the same context. It doesn't work for like most
Yeah.
people where they have multiple devices.
That's a different question. If you have like one wallet that like I have a wallet that has like things across in Solana, multiple L2s, and typically like your wallet can know. On top of that, I think wallets are now being smart about this. So I actually imagine a lot of wallets, and I have no inside information on this. I'm just guessing a lot of wallets. Well, when you connect,
He has insider information.
no, I don't. This is like a speculative. I imagine a lot of wallets will start being more smart when you connect and click a button. Like if you have an insufficient balance, will recommend you to have a sufficient balance. I'm guessing. Yeah.
Do you feel like wallets are the ideal interface for this? Because in my opinion, we do play around with trust and everything actually not delay.
Mm-hmm.
I think like applications should handle that because
I
think
agree.
like wallets are like very tricky to onboard actually new users, right? So
So I agree. I think applications should be more thoughtful about this, but I imagine there will increasingly exist tools make it very easy for applications to do this, which I actually think leads to the last segment, which is going to be about like how users use the chains, and the question is, do people come like kind of how a lot of us in the room probably do it with like a Phantom or a MetaMask or a browser extension? Do they use an embedded wallet? Like, how do users actually come? So I'm curious, when you recommend people in the ecosystem what to do, are you recommending them build with like a bring your own wallet first experience or a embedded wallet first experience?
Well, I think it totally depends on like what kind of users you want to onboard. If you're trying to actually onboard new users, net new users, then embedded wallet solutions that's the go-to. If you want the build for crypto natives, then yeah, you want to support all of the major wallets. I mean, I'm curious like how people think about this question. I mean, also this question of like what kind of users are worth building for today, right? We've got like all this infrastructure, we figured out scale in some ways. There's some problems, but yeah, what?
I think it shouldn't be either, like it can be like both. I think like I really like the approach that, for example, instead of being with the light version, create a different interface for like two users.
Mm.
And if they become more native, they might start to use a wallet. Like you can do both. It's not
For sure.
huge
Yeah.
amount of technical overhead. And for most applications, you probably want to target the crypto niche on some level first, right? Like because you want to build a user base that is attractive for Web2 users to come in, and you can just like straight go to Web2 users. But there are probably
Yeah.
those use cases as well where you can completely abstract away the
Yeah.
progress.
I haven't used Instant Apps Lite. You said Instant App Lite? Lite?
Instant app, yeah.
Instant App Lite.
I think it was them. Someone just said
Yeah.
it to me. I also don't use it, but it now only has like earn money.
Yeah.
Nothing of the other.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Before I was at O1, I was in the near ecosystem. So like from like the L1's perspective, it's like kind of a pertinent problem. Like where do your users come from? And if you look at like the near ecosystem's top 3 apps, like one is a game, one is like a step to earn.
Sweatcoin?
Yeah,
Yep.
Sweatcoin. And then the other one is like an ad retargeting platform. And like Sweatcoin had the most by far. And it's like if you asked every one of those users to come with a wallet, like it's impossible.
Right.
So like it just completely depends on the use case that you're targeting. And it's more of a question of like what do you want to grow the pie? Like do you want end users, like which maybe we'll say are like Web2 users for simplicity, or like to get a lot of people, or do you want to have like a narrow focus on Web3, maybe go closer to the sort of like infrastructure side and grow like a user base that understands what the tech is and probably has like a higher like average value per user. And that just completely depends on the type of application you're building.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, it's very application dependent.
Maybe I'm realizing, I know we said last segment, okay, one last question, or we had to wind things down.
Yeah, I guess we could do one more. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, as like a final thought, where do you think value accrues in the stack? So when somebody uses a DeFi application, so it's like you're saying very simple, like in the DEX ecosystem, like who are the winners in terms of like who makes the money in the stack? Is it
Well-
the base layer? Is it the L2? Is it the wallet? Is it the like where do you see value accruing in this stack?
Yeah, I mean, to take the like MEV like worldview, right? It's like whoever controls ordering, or like has final say on ordering. I think MEV is like, yes, MEV is like a long-term sustainable revenue source for any chain. I think application layers have a lot to capture though. Like you can really have insane profit margins as an application, right? You build a piece of software. It's like, it's 3 people. It's a good piece of code, and it runs in perpetuity. And that's, it's an incredible business model. And in fact, I think like a good kind of like exercise is to think about the cost structure of a centralized exchange, right? The vast majority of their costs come from compliance and sort of maintaining compliance with various regulatory frameworks and policies. A DEX has like effectively 0 compliance overhead. And I think long term, like as execution gets better, as sort of the order flow stack of like end user to settlement matures and becomes more efficient, that DEXs will end up flipping sexes in terms of market share because their cost structure is just like that much more profitable. I think there's also an interesting point here on value capture with respect to the fragmentation talk, because fragmentation is bad for end users, right? Just like clunky UX. And it's also bad for execution or best execution. But it is incredible if you're like a clever profiteer and willing to run like a searcher or a solver, right? Because you effectively have a very inefficient market that offers many opportunities to profit. In some ways, like I wonder, like, does the Flashbots cabal actually want to maintain like this very fragmented world, or the solver cabal want to maintain this very fragmented world of rollups and chains? Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah.
I'd say they do. And also, there's some wallets that are also making bank.
Wallets are incredible, right? What did Phantom make last year?
No comment.
I think it was 9 digits. Yeah, it's yeah.
But anyways.
Cool. We should
wrap
wrap
things up. Hopefully, you walked away with an understanding of the trade-offs of Ethereum versus Solana, the trade-offs of Ethereum's roadmap, the trade-offs of building on an L2 versus an app chain versus deploying on a mainnet, understanding the trade-offs when it comes to how users enter your application, and do the way they enter it, is it affected by the infrastructure you're sitting on top of? You walked away with thinking about kind of the trade-offs of taking technical risk or platform risk. So hopefully it was an informative talk, and by the way, awesome like audience participation. My God.
I'm glad everybody